Chapter 4. Far Up the Ladder. The flashing red and blue lights painted the entire surround while Sergeant Davis looked at the scene around him, and it reminded him of the war footage he would watch on the news of other countries. Shell casings littered the sidewalk and street, yellow numbered identification tags lay everywhere, bullet hole riddled walls, numerous New Rochelle, NYPD, and FBI units scattered all around, and the restaurant across the street looked like it had been through World War II. The medical units had only just arrived to take the bodies away after they were examined and photographed by the forensic team. "Hey, Sarge," one of his privates called over to him as he walked over. The private looked at him while holding a golden shell casing up with his pen. "Take a look." Davis took the private's pen and examined the shell more closely. He knew within an instant what it was. "AK-47 round," he murmured, squinting for a better focus. "This is insane. There has to be enough for an army unit out here." Davis and the private were interrupted by the light squeaking of brakes when two black Chevy SUVs pulled up to the restaurant. Davis immediately noticed the NYPD police chief Adam DeLeggio's tall, gangly figure exit one of the SUVs, his bald head glistening in the sunlight. "Is already seen the police chief on the scene?" the private said as the chief's eyes rested on Davis and started to approach. "He's looking this way," the private said before walking off to look busy. The squeaking of the chief's expensive leather shoes ceased, and his displeasing gaze fell upon Sam, still holding up the shell casing. "Sergeant Davis. Didn't expect to see you on the job today. Were you supposed to be on vacation?" the chief said, eyes focused hard on his own. "Yes, sir, but a situation like this," Davis paused, looking at the carnage, "I think you could use all the help you can get." Chief DeLeggio clapped Davis on the shoulder and sighed. "It's good to have people on the force like you. Now, what do you have there?" DeLeggio hinted towards the shell casing. "AK-47 round, Chief," Davis began. "I'm sure you've been briefed on your way here, but this is next level. Shit's really hit the fan. These guys—" Davis was interrupted by an FBI agent that took the chief to the side. He was whispering lightly into DeLeggio's ear, and too far to hear, but Davis had a deaf son, and because of this he knew how to lip read, and he began to do so behind the safety of his sunglasses. The FBI agent looked seriously into the chief's eyes. "Keep the press out of this until we can figure out how to communicate this mess. It's too big and in the open to keep quiet. This was unexpected, and we need to assure all ends are tied." "Right," DeLeggio said. "Those are some of the O'Reilly clan in that restaurant, along with known Jangadi affiliates. Get with—" Two EMTs rushed past, obstructing Davis's view of the conversation for a brief moment. "And report back to us. We don't want anything getting out of hand." The chief nodded his head and made his way back towards Davis. "Sorry about that, Sergeant. The FBI's involved. You know how they like to run things. But I want you to lock down this crime scene. Get it under control. The FBI is clearing the scene." "You got it, Chief," Davis said. DeLeggio started to walk away and shouted towards Davis. "Sergeant, I appreciate you coming in for this." Davis nodded and walked off towards some of his team. He wasn't sure what the FBI agent meant by all he was mentioning to the chief, but he didn't like their presence here, especially agents barking orders at his officers, who were just equally if not better trained and experienced than them. "Hey, Sarge," another one of his officers shouted, "come check this out." Davis made his way over to a smashed-in pay meter and scattered coins. Officer Maria Valdez was standing over the scene with another one of his privates. "What do you have for me, Mendez?" Davis asked. "Looks like someone left in a hurry. Could be a panicked bystander, could be someone involved, maybe nothing. Tire tracks here and there," she pointed to sections of the asphalt that had significant tire marks. "There's also another pair down closer towards the restaurant as well. Maybe worth looking into?" "It might just be," Davis said, holding his chin. "Get pictures of those tread marks?" He looked around for possible cameras but found none in sight. "Pull intersection cameras within a 2, 5, and 10-mile radius if possible. Hopefully there may be something there we could use." "You got it, Sarge," she said before walking off into the distance. Eli walked briskly into one of his venues, a local bar in Queens called the Mediterranean, with Jim closely in tail. He quickly glanced at his gold Rolodex wristwatch, which read 1:23 p.m. "I'm sure things are kicking off smoothly right about now," he said aloud as he fiddled with the keys to open his bar. "For sure," Jim touted happily. I made sure our marksmen were perfectly positioned. Eli stepped into his Mediterranean-themed bar and walked through the empty dining area, where the chairs were neatly placed atop tables. Would you look at this, Eli said, picking up a shard of broken glass off the floor. Sloppy. I need to find out who closed last night. Eli flicked the glass shard off into the distance. Jim scrunched his face. Do you think the hit will take out Tony and the pesky kid? I'm shooting for the stars, Jim. I'm hoping for Braden, too. The whole Eli stopped dead in his tracks to see Frank sitting on his desk in the bar's back office, accompanied by Victor Lombardo and another one of his bodyguards. Eli, your phone dead? He said calmly. Eli stood in silence, dumbstruck, and felt as though his feet were glued into place. What's the matter? You lose your voice too? Frank said with an eerily calm composure. Eli regained some of his mentality, although he still felt as though he was recovering from a swift punch to the stomach. No, Frank, it's a pleasure to see you. Just surprised. Want me to get you a beer or something at the bar? No, Eli, I'm not here for that. Business brought me here today. Take a seat. Eli sat across from his desk, and Frank remained standing. Take a walk, Jim, Frank said. Jim understood and immediately scuttered out of the room and closed the door behind him. A few minutes of silence ticked by, and Frank rubbed his head in his hands and sighed. Managing our Queens branch keeping you busy? Eli shrugged his shoulders. No busier than usual, boss. I assure you I'm running a tight ship. Frank grinned and chuckled. No busier than usual. He turned to Victor, who looked very displeased. No busier than usual, he says. Victor grunted. Frank crossed his arms. Perhaps, then, you may be too busy to realize that there was a high-profile murder in your territory yesterday, and I had to hear it from Paulie fucking Cicero, instead of my own territory boss, my own flesh and blood. Eli remained silent as Frank waited for a response, but Frank continued as Eli sat, frozen. Do you realize how this makes you look? How it makes our organization look? Eli saw a moment of opportunity. Maybe Frank hadn't heard about his newest hit yet. Maybe, just maybe, if he played it safe here and pushed his plans faster, he could just get away with this. Perhaps Frank was more disconnected than he thought, and that his glorious empire was becoming too big to manage. Frank, listen, Eli began. Let me first start by saying how sorry I am that you had to find out this way. Yes, I knew about what happened, but I only found out late last night. I swear it. As soon as I found out, me and Jim had been working all through the night and morning trying to figure out who was behind this. And the calls, I gave Tony the responsibility of handling my calls for me. Frank was hard to read, nearly impossible, but Eli could feel the anger in the room. Frank paced around the desk with his arms behind his back. You know, Eli, my father always said, the more someone talks, the more stupid they sound. And you sound pretty fucking stupid to me right now. He paused. Where's Tony? Eli shrugged and put on the most sincere, clueless look he could muster. I don't know. I haven't heard from him since I gave him this authority. Frank sighed aggravatingly. Do you realize how much is at stake here, Eli? How far up the ladder this organization goes? This isn't some game where we make assumptions and fiddle with uncertainties. We have our hands everywhere. Another war with the O'Reillys will shake our very foundation and ruin our legitimacy and anonymity that we have worked so long to build. A ringing of a cell phone in Victor's pocket stopped Frank dead in his tracks. Victor reached for his pocket and pulled out an old-fashioned flip phone. He looked at the screen and gave Frank a solid nod. Frank was highly against the use of cell phones for most members of his organization during sensitive meetings. He was even known to take the phones of attendees and get-togethers and place them in microwaves. Eli was a little surprised to see one now. Frank moved in close to Eli's face while the phone continued to ring. Find Tony, get me information on what's going on, and get your fucking territory in order. I will find someone who will. The other bodyguard opened the door, and Victor stepped out with Frank, who opened the phone. Eli managed to hear Frank say one quick sentence on the phone. Right, I'll be on my way. Before the door slammed shut. Eli exhaled deeply and slumped further down into his chair. Victor pulled the car up towards the pier on the lower end of Manhattan. It was starting to rain, and the clouds above were darkening. The car screeched to a halt. Frank's other bodyguard stepped out and opened the door for him, while holding out an umbrella. Frank grabbed hold of the umbrella and stepped out into the cold autumn air. He looked onward at a large crystal white yacht which read Valhalla in the distance, parked up against the pier, surrounded by a few smaller craft tethered nearby. "Stay here," Frank said to his two companions as he walked off towards the vessel. Frank picked up his pace as the rain began to fall harder and stepped on board. He glanced around as a safety precaution and stepped inside the lounge doors. He was enveloped by an overwhelming modern-styled white and silver interior with plush couches and expensive furniture. The room was dead silent. Only the patter of rain greeted his ears. Frank sat uneasily in one of the chairs and started to close his umbrella. "You know it's bad luck to have those open indoors." Frank turned to see Police Chief DeLeggio standing behind him holding a bottle of Dom Pregnon and examining the label. Frank closed the umbrella with a click. "You called me here?" DeLeggio acted as though he hadn't heard him and kept examining the champagne. "You know, I've actually never tasted this before." He fidgeted with the top and popped the bottle open, and took a swig. "Ah," he said, as he held the bottle over towards Frank, but Frank shook his head. "Ah, yes, do you like her?" DeLeggio said, extending his arms open, hinting towards the yacht. "We impounded this beauty yesterday. Some rich punk didn't want to pay his taxes." Frank shook his head. "Why did you call me here? I'm assuming it's about the murder of Dennis. I have everything under control. You just have to play your part, as always, and it'll be settled." The police chief had a blank look of amusement growing on his face, and his large ears perked. "What?" Frank asked, unamused. DeLeggio laughed. "You don't know?" Frank was starting to go frustrated, as he had a feeling he was about to be told something that, yet again, he hadn't been informed about. "Quit the play, Adam, and get to the point." DeLeggio looked at his wristwatch. 3:12 p.m. 3:12 p.m. and you still don't know? There was a mass shooting at Elan's in New Rochelle this afternoon. 3 hired affiliates of yours were killed, and 1 O'Reilly gang member. Another is in critical condition at the hospital. Frank got up from his chair and paced towards one of the windows, unlooking the pier, and stroked his stubbled beard with concern. "FBI's already pulled the recordings. I got the call about that when I was waiting for you here. Braden was there, and so was a vehicle registered under your nephew's name." Tony, Frank thought, not sure how to digest the information. He knew that acting impulsively was a bad call here. There was a leak, or a loose screw somewhere. There was too big of an information gap in his network for there not to be. He had to be cautious. "All I know is," DeLeggio continued, "you have to get your crew together before things get more out of hand than they already are." Frank stepped away from the window and looked at him hard in the eyes. Maintaining a cool composure, he took a breath. "I have to get my crew in order?" he began sternly. "Don't you forget it is I who owns your ass, and the entire NYPD, and members of the Fed. It was my family, after years of hard work, that has established this empire. So do be careful to know your position, and watch your mouth around me, Chief." Frank grabbed the bottle of champagne from Adam's hands and placed it hard onto the bar countertop. "Now," Frank said to a now quiet and less cocky DeLeggio, "I want caps put on everything. I want this situation silenced. Lock everything up until we have a clear blueprint of what's going on here. Get your uniforms on the streets. I want ears and eyes everywhere for the next couple of weeks, and you are to tell me everything. Do you understand?" DeLeggio nodded. Yes, of course. I was merely just talking, Frank. No need to push the power card on me, I get it." Frank knew that was a line of bull coming from DeLeggio, but he wanted everyone in line during a situation like this. He gave the police chief a nod and opened up his umbrella again. "Where are you going?" Adam asked. Frank walked out into the rain and let the door shut without another word. He got into the car as Victor held the door open for him. Victor slid into the driver's seat and put the car into drive. "Where are we going?" "Tony's apartment," Frank said. Victor obeyed and started to turn the wheel. "You all right, Frank?" Frank stared off into the window. "No. War's coming."